Hello everyone, and welcome to Fresh Master Channel. Today, we are going to have some story from Reddit. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. These simple clips mean a lot to the future of this channel.
My story starts on the frigid shores of Maine, where my childhood unfolded in the shadow of a crumbling lighthouse. My parents had bought the property on a whim, hoping to turn it into a bed and breakfast, but the dream never materialized. Instead, the lighthouse became a place of solitude, filled with the distant roar of waves and the moaning of wind through cracked glass panes. I often climbed to the top where the lens once turned and watched the sea churn below. It was there, with the Atlantic stretching endlessly before me, that I first learned the power of silence and its weight. In my early teens, tragedy struck when my older brother Thomas drowned in a boating accident. He had always been the adventurous one, the risk-taker. His end of life left a void in our family that no one dared to discuss. My father buried himself in work, and my mother turned to her garden, obsessively tending to rows of roses that withered no matter how much care she gave them. I withdrew into books and projects, teaching myself how to fix old radios and clocks scavenged from local yard sales. Repairing those broken machines became a metaphor for my life, an endless quest to mend what had been shattered. By the time I left for college, I was determined to escape the ghosts of my childhood. I majored in business, not out of passion but practicality, and quickly established myself as a top student. Yet my fascination with fixing things remained. While my classmates networked and partied, I spent my nights restoring a battered 1967 Mustang I'd bought with money earned from odd jobs. That car, a beast of rust and potential, became my sanctuary. I often drove it aimlessly through back roads, seeking answers I couldn't articulate. One of those drives brought me to a small, dilapidated diner on the outskirts of Hartford. Inside, I met Evelyn, a waitress with a sharp wit and a quicker smile. She was older than me, with stories etched into her features like lines on a map. Over late-night coffee and pie, she told me about her failed marriage, her dream of becoming a painter, and the time she hitchhiked across the Midwest with only $20 in her pocket. Evelyn became my first confidant, the person who saw through my carefully constructed exterior. But like all things in my life back then, our connection was fleeting. She moved away to pursue her art, leaving behind a postcard that read, "Don't let the road swallow you." Years later, I found myself in a corporate job I neither loved nor hated, climbing a ladder that seemed to lead nowhere. It was during this time that my great-uncle Seth extended an unexpected olive branch, inviting me to join the family business. Seth was a shrewd man with a penchant for high-stakes risks, and he saw potential in me that I hadn't yet recognized. I accepted the offer, trading my nondescript apartment for a sprawling office and the weight of family expectations. The work was grueling, but rewarding, a puzzle of logistics and strategy that appealed to my need to fix and control. Just as I began to feel settled, another twist of fate arrived in the form of a phone call. My childhood home, the Lighthouse, had been sold to developers. They planned to demolish it and build luxury condos. The news hit harder than I expected, dredging up memories of Thomas and the life I'd tried to leave behind. I visited one last time, standing in the shadow of the lighthouse as heavy machinery rumbled in the distance. Watching it fall was like watching the last piece of my past crumble away. It was both a loss and a liberation. That sense of freedom carried me into new territories. It was a chilly, overcast November afternoon in Chicago, and I stood alone in a vacant lot. The cold wind cut through me, damp and relentless, as if mocking my attempt to find clarity. Scattered around me were the remnants of the burned-out building, charred beams, fragments of drywall blackened with soot, shards of glass glinting faintly in the weak light. The debris swirled in small eddies, carried by the breeze. It all mirrored my own life, empty, shattered, and devoid of warmth. I kicked at a chunk of concrete absently, my thoughts tangled in how to salvage anything from this mess. Olivia entered my life at a time when I least expected it. I had reluctantly attended a fundraising gala, a dull affair filled with hollow conversations and obligatory handshakes. As I sipped mediocre wine and plotted my exit, she appeared like a burst of light, her smile disarming and her presence magnetic. At 29, I was deeply embedded in my family's retail business, following my great-uncle Seth's directives as his ambitious protege. Olivia, with her confidence and grace, disrupted the monotony of that evening, and eventually, my life. From the moment she greeted me, she made the world feel a little less tedious and a little more alive. Olivia was captivating, charming, confident, and stunningly beautiful. Her bronze skin, graceful frame, and lively personality made her magnetic. Suddenly, the dull event felt less like a chore. I had always been confident in business and sports, but when it came to social situations, especially with women, I stumbled. I was reserved, inexperienced, and unsure of myself. But Olivia's easygoing demeanor disarmed me. By the end of the night, I mustered the courage to ask her out, and to my surprise, she said yes. Our first date was unforgettable. We discovered common interests and an effortless chemistry that drew us closer. Within weeks, we were inseparable. Olivia wasn't shy about taking the lead in our relationship. She was bold and decisive in ways I admired. One night, she made her feelings crystal clear, pulling me inside her house in a way I'd never forget. From then on, closeness became a natural and joyous part of our lives. Within a year, we were married and building a life together. We bought a beautiful 4-bedroom home in an upscale neighborhood, landscaped the yard, got a dog, and settled into what felt like a perfect life. Marriage was everything I'd hoped for: companionship, emotional support, and a deep connection. Of course, we faced challenges. My demanding work schedule sometimes left Olivia feeling neglected, and I occasionally found her quirks irritating. But the real issue was the time we spent with her family. Her parents were friendly and well-meaning, but had a habit of offering unsolicited advice and gently pressuring us to have kids. They weren't around enough to cause significant friction, but her sister Mindy was a different story. Mindy was a shorter, slightly rounder version of Olivia, mimicking her style and mannerisms. The two were inseparable, always whispering, laughing, and sharing inside jokes. Since Mindy and her husband Bruce lived nearby, they were frequent visitors, a little too frequent for my liking. Mindy's husband Bruce grated on me. He was tall, good-looking, and overly self-assured, but not particularly bright. Bruce ran his family's struggling furniture store in Joliet and spoke about it as though it were a Fortune 500 company. His constant boasting about his supposed business savvy was laughable given his obvious mismanagement. Still, for Olivia's sake, I kept my opinions to myself, nodding politely as Bruce droned on during family gatherings. 2 years into our marriage, Olivia asked me to help Bruce and Mindy financially. She set the stage with a romantic dinner, dressed to impress, and created the perfect atmosphere. I thought she wanted an intimate evening together, but her real agenda emerged over dessert. She explained how worried she was about Bruce and Mindy, then revealed the issue. Bruce's business was struggling and they needed a substantial loan to stay afloat. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, cutting through her carefully rehearsed pitch. She hesitated, caught off guard before admitting, $50,000, maybe $60,000. The number stunned me. While we were financially stable, most of our wealth was tied up in a family trust, and withdrawing that kind of money would complicate things. Bernie Blackman, the trust's meticulous attorney, would insist on repayment plans and make it clear that the loan couldn't simply disappear. For the first time in our marriage, I hesitated. "That's a lot of money, Liv," I said cautiously. Olivia assured me it was a safe investment, that Bruce had big plans and would repay us quickly. I didn't believe Bruce could turn things around, but I wanted to make Olivia happy. Against my better judgment, I wrote the $60,000 check, warning her we'd need to be more careful with our spending until the money was repaid. In my heart, I knew the money was gone the moment I handed it over. A few months later, while searching for a missing flash drive, I turned the house upside down. My search led me to the guest room, where I noticed the bed looked oddly rumpled, as though someone had recently slept there. It wasn't like Olivia to leave anything in disarray, so I asked her about it that evening. "Did someone use the guest bed?" "It looked messy earlier," I said casually. Olivia's reaction was strange. She stammered, her face flushed, and after a long pause, she mumbled, Yeah. I was cleaning and got so tired I took a quick nap." I didn't question her explanation at the time. I trusted her implicitly, even found her embarrassment endearing. It never occurred to me that she might be hiding something. That messy bed was just the first red flag I ignored. Over the next year, there were others, small, seemingly insignificant things that I brushed aside because I trusted her. Her quiet job as an assistant manager at a bookstore suddenly required long Tuesday meetings that stretched late into the evening. Bruises appeared on her body in odd places, ones she always dismissed with vague explanations. I even found unfamiliar lingerie in the laundry once, but she laughed it off, saying it had been on sale and too good to pass up. Then there was the orange juice. Olivia switched to shopping at an upscale grocery store that didn't carry my favorite brand. I asked her to shop elsewhere, but she insisted the new store was more convenient, right on her way home from those Tuesday meetings. At the time, it seemed trivial, but it planted the first seed of doubt. Looking back, I realized it was just one piece of a puzzle I had been too blind to see. Less than 18 months after the first loan, Olivia hinted that Bruce and Mindy needed more money. By then, Bruce hadn't repaid a cent of the $60,000, and I wasn't keen on throwing more cash at what I saw as a failing business. I brushed off Olivia's hints, hoping she'd drop it. But she persisted, claiming they'd lose their business without upgrades and more inventory. Reluctantly, I agreed to review Bruce's business plan and visit the store, hoping Olivia would see it was a bad idea. I met Bruce on a Monday morning. Enthusiastic as ever, he gave me a tour of the store, introduced the staff, and spoke confidently about his plans to turn things around. We sat in his office for half an hour as I diplomatically shared my concerns. Bruce, I think there are deeper issues here. Without cutting costs and optimizing operations, even upgrades and inventory won't increase revenue significantly, I said. I hesitated before adding, you might even consider selling the business. Bruce was visibly offended. No way. All we need is a facelift. That'll fix everything, he insisted. I avoided outright refusal and explained, I don't have the personal funds for a large loan. I'd need to go through the trust, and there's no guarantee it'll be approved. I'll talk to Bernie and see what's possible. Bruce nodded confidently, thanking me profusely. I left feeling guilty for not being more honest. Driving home, I replayed the meeting in my mind, trying to absolve my guilt. Then I saw something that caught my attention, a small green grocery store with a Salvador's sign. It looked unique, and the name felt familiar, though I couldn't place it at first. Suddenly it clicked. Salvador's was where Olivia had started shopping, the store that didn't carry my orange juice but was supposedly convenient. Yet this store wasn't near her work, our house, or anywhere that made sense for her routine, unless her Tuesday meetings were at Bruce's furniture store. I made a U-turn, drove past Salvador's, and then returned to Bruce's parking lot. Sitting there, I checked online to confirm there was only one Salvador's in Chicago. I spent 20 minutes running through possible explanations. Maybe Olivia had another office nearby, met Mindy for lunch, or attended a fitness class. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize, my mind kept returning to a conclusion I didn't want to accept. Driven by suspicion, I decided to confront Bruce directly. I got out of the car and walked briskly to the front of his furniture store, noticing that it closed early on Tuesdays, noon to be exact. My unease deepened. Inside, I approached a middle-aged employee sipping coffee. "Excuse me, I need to speak with Bruce McCoy. It's urgent," I said. The man barely looked up. "I'm on break," he grumbled. Annoyed, I repeated my request, explaining I needed to discuss financial matters with Bruce. Finally, recognition flickered across his face. "You're the guy who was here earlier, right? Bruce is meeting with a supplier, but you can wait for him in the break room. He shouldn't be long." He led me to a shabby room and handed me a cup of coffee. I paced nervously, rehearsing a plan to confront Bruce, bluffing that I had evidence of his and Olivia's affair. I figured if Bruce was guilty, he'd crack under pressure. If not, I'd make an awkward joke and let it go. As I waited, I glanced around the room, fidgeting with magazines and flipping through TV channels before my curiosity got the better of me. I noticed a beat-up pea-green couch with coffee stains and a torn armrest, clearly past its prime. Something about it felt off. Lifting a cushion, I discovered it was a fold-out bed. I pulled it open and my pulse quickened. The wrinkled sheets bore faint yellowed stains, lipstick marks, and a lingering perfume scent. Beneath the bed, I found scattered items: a pen, loose change, a broken coffee cup, an empty KY gel tube, and a restaurant receipt. The receipt was from a Mexican restaurant Olivia loved. Her signature, elegant and unmistakable, confirmed she had been there. Though it was circumstantial, it snapped everything into focus: the long Tuesday meetings, unexplained bruises, unfamiliar underwear, and the guest bed mess. The evidence painted a clear picture. Olivia and Bruce were having an affair. Suddenly, my plan to pressure Bruce felt foolish. I needed undeniable proof before confronting them. The store's early closing on Tuesdays gave me a lead on their likely rendezvous time. With that knowledge, I could catch them in the act. Furious, I folded the bed and sat on the couch, heart pounding. I felt betrayed in a way I never had before, angry, hurt, and humiliated all at once. Every emotion boiled over, but one stood out: the desire for revenge. I forced myself to think clearly, considering how to turn their weaknesses against them. I fantasized about physically confronting Bruce, but knew it would only land me in jail. Instead, I considered refusing the loan and demanding the repayment of every penny Bruce owed me. I resolved to act decisively, but only after gathering irrefutable evidence of their betrayal. Then I recalled something Bernie had once told me when I was considering taking a loan from a particularly aggressive bank. If you owe money to someone who doesn't care about your well-being, they'll have you in a stranglehold, he'd warned. I wanted to have Bruce in that kind of grip. From the doorway of Bruce's office, I watched him chatting and shaking hands with the supplier. I waved and smiled. He returned the gesture, escorted the supplier out, and then hurried to the break room where I was waiting. "Hey, Mike, did you forget something? Need more details?" he asked in a friendly tone. I shook my head, smiling. "No, Bruce, I just wanted to clarify something. I think I might have given the wrong impression earlier. I hope you know I really respect what you're doing with the store. You're a smart businessman, and I believe you've got a real shot at success here. But when I asked about contingency plans earlier, I might not have phrased it well." Bruce grinned, dismissing my concern. "Don't worry, Mike, I get it. Smart investors ask tough questions." "Exactly," I said, nodding. "I'm genuinely impressed with what you've built here. And because we're family, I want to be absolutely sure this investment is not just a good opportunity, but also the right choice for both of us. So I wanted to reassure you that I'm fully committed to doing everything I can to secure the funding for you. I'm confident we'll make it happen." "Great to hear," Bruce said, his grin widening. "Now, I don't have a lot of liquid cash in my personal accounts," I added, "so I'll need to pull from the trust fund, but I'm pretty sure I can convince Bernie to agree, and we'll get the money for you." Bruce's grin turned into a full-blown smile. "That's fantastic, Mike. I know this business is ready to take off. This loan will be as safe as money in the bank. No need to worry." "I'm not worried," I replied. "Bernie will want to formalize everything, though. He's very particular about protecting the trust. There will need to be collateral and clear terms, but if you're okay with that, I think we can get it finalized within a week." The next morning, I walked into Bernie's office and sank into a chair. He was on the phone, jotting notes, and held up a finger to let me know he'd be with me in a moment. I couldn't sit still while I waited, fidgeting until he finally ended the call and turned to me, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "What's got you so worked up, Mike?" Clearing my throat, I leaned forward. "Bernie, I'm going to need to tap into the trust for a significant loan." "Okay," he said, opening a spreadsheet. "What kind of loan, and how much are we talking?" I leaned in further. "Before we get into the details, I need your complete confidentiality on this." "Of course," Bernie began, but I cut him off. "No, listen," I said firmly. "I mean, no one else. No Seth, no one at work, no one in the family can know what I'm doing." Bernie frowned, shifting in his chair. "Mike, if this is something illegal..." "It's nothing illegal," I assured him quickly. "In fact, I want this to be ironclad, legally speaking." He raised an eyebrow, but let me continue. "I need you to draft loan documents that are crystal clear. The loan will be secured by collateral, specifically the business, and I want the penalties for default spelled out in no uncertain terms." Bernie's eyes narrowed. "It almost sounds like you're planning for a default. Are you setting someone up?" I hesitated, but then met his gaze. "Yes, I want to trap Bruce, and it's because of Olivia." Bernie's jaw dropped slightly, and he struggled to respond. After a moment, he took a sip of water and asked, "Are you absolutely sure about this?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. Within a week, Bernie had the paperwork ready. I brought it to Bruce, who invited his lawyer, his cousin Tim Sowers, to review it with us. Tim, a compact man with an intense demeanor, scanned the document. "All right," Tim said. "I went over this last night. It's pretty straightforward as far as business loans go, but there are a couple of points you should note before signing." "Okay," Bruce said, his usual easygoing smile in place. "What's the scoop?" Tim sighed slightly before continuing. "First, the loan is $425,000, payable over 7 years. Payments start immediately, about $6,000 a month." Bruce nodded along as though he understood every word. "However," Tim added, "you're only receiving $365,000. The remaining $60,000 will go back to repay a loan Mike already extended to you." Bruce shrugged, unbothered. "Got it? Makes sense." Tim frowned, but moved on. "Second, this loan is secured by collateral, your business and the land up near Keokuk." Bruce perked up. "That's the duck hunting spot, right?" "Yes," I confirmed. Tim continued. "This is to ensure the trust is protected. If you default, the business and that property could be taken." Bruce nodded again. I understand. Tim pressed further. You're aware that penalties start accruing 3 months after a missed payment? Yes, Bruce said confidently, glancing at me with a knowing smile, as if we had an unspoken agreement that I'd go easy on him. I returned his smile without saying a word. At home, Olivia was ecstatic. She couldn't stop talking about how Bruce's business was now set up for success thanks to the loan. Somehow I managed to hold back from saying what I really thought, that Bruce himself was the business's biggest liability, and no amount of money could fix that. Over the next few weeks, biting my tongue about Bruce's competence was actually the least of my challenges around Olivia. I needed to gather more information before I could end our marriage the way I wanted, and that would take time. Controlling my emotions was far harder. My feelings swung wildly from sadness to rage to disgust every time I thought about her betrayal. Even sitting through dinner with her without snapping was becoming a test of will. Avoiding closeness was another challenge. When I couldn't avoid it, I forced myself to get through it by summoning a memory I'd buried for years, a memory I never thought I'd use as a coping mechanism. Back when I was 18, my friends and I went to San Diego for spring break. One night, we crossed the border into Tijuana looking for trouble. We drank heavily, watched some disturbing adult shows, and eventually ended up with courtesans. I got paired with a woman in her 30s who looked like life had chewed her up and spit her out. She wasn't attractive, and even through my drunken haze, I hesitated. I tried making excuses to back out, but my friends egged me on, mocking me and questioning my manhood. Feeling trapped, I faked a grin, took a couple more shots for courage, and followed her upstairs to a dingy, cramped room above the bar. The sheets were grimy, the air was thick with unpleasant smells, and I blocked out everything: the room, the noise, even her presence. I treated her like an object, a means to an end, shutting down every shred of humanity in myself to get it over with. Fast forward to the present, and I found myself using the same strategy with Olivia. During Zex, I mentally replaced her with that woman from years ago. I shut off my emotions and went through the motions with cold efficiency. No tenderness, no affection, just a mechanical act. In time, it became disturbingly easy to do. I was rough, detached, and utterly devoid of warmth. Olivia noticed the change. One night she remarked, "I wish we could have gentler, more romantic moments in bed." But strangely, she didn't seem to mind the shift overall. In fact, she hinted that she preferred this version of me in some ways. I couldn't help but think she might have had a lucrative side hustle catering to American tourists in Tijuana in another life. Gathering concrete evidence of her affair proved to be as straightforward as I'd anticipated. Bruce had used some of the loan money to renovate his store, which meant contractors were coming and going all day. I slipped $500 to the electrician, who discreetly installed a camera and audio recorder and a light fixture above the lounge room sofa. By Monday morning, the setup was complete, and within 2 days, I had all the proof I needed. I thought I was prepared for what I'd see. Sitting in my office with a drink and some snacks, I planned to watch the footage with cold detachment, as if it were a crime drama. But nothing could have prepared me for the gut-wrenching reality of seeing my wife with another man. Knowing was one thing. Seeing it was something else entirely. By the end of the video, I was a wreck. Half a bottle of scotch was gone, my desk was trashed, I'd vomited twice, and I'd hurled a paperweight hard enough to dent my office door. The footage was exactly what I expected, but it didn't make it any easier to watch. The recording began on Tuesday morning. Around midday, a woman in a blue dress arrived carrying a large shopping bag. She pulled fresh sheets from the bag and carefully spread them over the sofa bed. I slowed the footage when I realized the woman was Olivia. She took a bottle of wine and 2 glasses from the bag, then neatly folded her dress and placed it back inside. Wearing thigh-high stockings, a revealing bra, and French-cut underwear, she perched on the edge of the sofa with a novel, looking for all the world like an actress in some avant-garde art exhibit. When Bruce finally walked in, Olivia set the book aside, greeted him with a smile, and hugged him. She playfully scolded him for making her wait, to which he smirked and said, "You're just impatient as always." They laughed like they shared some private joke. After a few kisses, Olivia unbuckled his belt and pulled down his pants with practiced ease. What followed was painfully routine. They moved with a familiarity that suggested they'd done this countless times. Bruce's rhythm was mechanical, almost robotic, and the whole encounter lacked passion. Around the 10-minute mark, Bruce finished, and Olivia's exaggerated reaction made it clear she did too. They lay there in silence for a while before Bruce rolled over to kiss her again. Watching the scene unfold was worse than I'd imagined. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the banality of it all. The ease with which they acted, the absence of guilt or hesitation made it all the more devastating. And as I stared at the screen, my anger solidified into resolve. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about reclaiming control, no matter what it took. By the time their little rendezvous ended, I was seething with a mix of pain and fury. The images I'd just watched felt like they had been burned into my brain, a scar I knew would never fade. There was no coming back from this. I would never forgive either of them. But at least I had a plan. Not to salvage my marriage, but to end it. As I reached to turn off the video, their conversation caught my attention. Olivia lay on her side, propped up on one elbow, idly tracing patterns on Bruce's chest as he sprawled on his back. They exchanged quiet words and lazy smiles like a picture-perfect couple from a romance movie. Then Olivia's voice broke the silence. "I hate that we're stuck using the store for this," she murmured. Bruce rolled onto his side to face her. "What other choice do we have? If we went to a hotel, it'd leave a paper trail. And you remember what happened the last time we tried sneaking around at one of our houses? We almost got caught." Olivia sighed, frustration evident in her voice. I know, it's just... This place is depressing. There's nothing sexy about changing dirty sheets from last week before we can even get started." Bruce reached out to stroke her cheek, his smile softening. "Maybe we should just run away together," he suggested lightly. Olivia laughed, but Bruce's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "I mean it, Liv. Do you ever regret marrying Mike? Sometimes I wonder, would it have been better if we'd gotten married instead?" Sitting up, Olivia pulled her knees to her chest and hugged them, resting her chin on top as she studied him. "Bruce, we've talked about this so many times. What we have is special, so special. But no, I don't think marrying you would have been better. Of course, we'd be happy together. But I do love Mike, and you love Mindy." She leaned forward, kissed him on the cheek, and traced her fingers across his chest. "You and I are different, Bruce. We're the kind of people who can love more than one person at a time. That's a gift. Not everyone can do it. We know how to keep things balanced, how to make everyone happy. Mike and Mindy, they're not like us. They can't compartmentalize the way we can." Hearing her rationalize her infidelity as some kind of higher virtue pushed me over the edge. Without thinking, I grabbed the paperweight on my desk and hurled it at the door. The loud crash felt like a release, but it didn't change the fact that I loved her. Or maybe I just loved the idea that she had once loved me, the only woman who ever had. It hit me how arrogant and delusional Olivia truly was. In her mind, her betrayal wasn't wrong. She'd twisted it into a moral virtue, convincing herself that it added to the love in the world, that it was her right, no, her duty, to act this way. That night, I stayed on the couch in my office, nursing my anger and exhaustion. By morning, I'd completed the paperwork needed to set my plan in motion. When I finally went home the next evening, Olivia was waiting for me, arms crossed and face stormy. "Where the hell were you last night?" she demanded. "I was worried sick. You didn't call, you didn't text, you just disappeared." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "I was at work. I had a few drinks, got too drunk to drive, and decided to crash there." She blinked, thrown off by my bluntness. "You got drunk at work?" she asked, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. I nodded and offered her a faint smile. She frowned, her tone sharp. "Well, you could have at least let me know. I almost called the police. What were you thinking drinking like that?" I ignored her question and walked past her into the living room. Without a word, I sank into the sofa, placed my briefcase on my lap, and began opening it. She wasn't far behind, her glare burning into me as I pulled out a stack of folders. "Seriously, Mike?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Are you just going to ignore me? What's going on?" I glanced up briefly. "Just give me a second, Liv. I need to organize some things." I took my time arranging the papers, placing them neatly on the coffee table. Then I leaned forward, rubbing my hands together with mock enthusiasm, and locked eyes with her. "All right," I said with a thin smile. "Let's get to it." Her confidence wavered, replaced by confusion, and maybe a flicker of fear. "Get to what?" she asked, her voice faltering. "Well, after what I saw last night..." I trailed off, letting the tension build. Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? What happened last night?" "Oh, just the video," I said casually. Her expression froze. "What video?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I smiled coldly. "You know exactly what video I'm talking about. The one of you and Bruce right there on the couch in his store's lounge. I thought it was enlightening. Her face shifted from disbelief to panic. Her mouth opened and closed as she struggled to form words, her wide eyes darting between me, the papers, and the door as if searching for an escape. Finally, she managed to stammer, "Mike, I don't understand." "Come on, Olivia," I said, my tone sharp. "You can't be that clueless. I know about you and Bruce. I know what you've been doing every other Tuesday for over a year." I gestured to the papers on the table. "This, right here, is the beginning of the end of our marriage." She gasped, covering her mouth. "Mike, please, we can work through this. I can explain." "Oh, I think I've got it all figured out," I interrupted. Reaching into my briefcase, I pulled out a DVD, held it up briefly, then slid it across the table toward her. "This right here contains all the clarity I need. A full expose of my loving wife and her charming affair with my brother-in-law." Olivia's gaze locked onto the DVD like it was a coiled snake, her body instinctively pulling back even as she made no attempt to touch it. "Go ahead, Liv, that's your copy," I said, my tone laced with sarcasm. "I won't get into how I got it, but don't worry. I've kept my own version for future use. Consider it a teaching aid for your enlightened philosophy on love and loyalty." She shifted slightly, as though she was about to stand, but hesitated, and sank back into the chair. Her lips pressed together before she spoke, her voice wavering under the guise of composure. "Mike, please, try to look at this from a broader perspective. There's no need to ruin our lives just because we see love and relationships differently. I love you and have always embraced our differences. Can't you do the same?" I scoffed, shaking my head. "Differences? Are you seriously calling cheating on your husband a difference or a talent? Because, Liv, let me tell you, cheating doesn't require talent. Anyone can do it. It's not exactly an achievement." She paused, looking up at the ceiling as if searching for the right words before returning her gaze to me. "Not talent, ability. That's the right word. I have the ability to love more than one person at a time. I've always had that capacity. And without clinging to outdated ideas about relationships, there's no reason I shouldn't embrace it." I leaned forward, my patience evaporating. "Stop, just stop. You're making me sick with these excuses. You think you've got some magical gift that justifies lying, deceiving, and betraying me? Newsflash, being involved with multiple people isn't some rare skill. It doesn't make you special. It just makes you a cheater." Olivia's expression shifted in an instant. The apologetic mask she had been wearing disappeared, replaced by a steely glare. She straightened her posture, her voice cutting through the tension with sharp defiance. "So, I'm a cheater. Fine," she said, her eyes locked on Mike. "From your perspective, I get how it might look that way. But let me make one thing clear. I never stopped loving you, Mike. I never stopped loving Bruce either." Her tone hardened further, unapologetic. "I didn't betray my emotions or my truth for some antiquated notion of monogamy. You can call me whatever you want, but I don't regret a single thing. Not one." Her breathing quickened, her face flushed with a mix of anger and passion, her eyes daring me to challenge her. I let the silence linger for a moment before responding. "Is this the life you want, Olivia? Some kind of open love, free-for-all hopping between one guy and another? If that's what you want, fine. But let's drop the pretense. You didn't tell me about Bruce because you knew I wouldn't accept it. You knew it was wrong." She turned her head away, refusing to meet my eyes, but I pressed on. "You lied to me, for years. You pretended we were a team, a partnership built on trust, while you snuck around with Bruce. And don't kid yourself. You didn't just lie to me. You lied to everyone who believed in us. You built a life on deception, Olivia. That's the truth." Tears began to streak her face, though her jaw remained clenched in defiance. She shook her head, wordlessly rejecting my accusations, but her silence spoke volumes. I reached for the papers on the table and pushed them toward her. "Read it. Hire a lawyer if you want. It's all there." She finally broke the silence, her voice trembling. "What if I don't want a divorce?" "Then that's too bad, because you're getting one," I said bluntly. A pause. Then with a hint of cruel humor, I added, "But hey, on the bright side, you won't be alone. I'm sure Bruce will be more than happy to keep you company." That night, I packed my things and moved into an apartment near the office. In the days that followed, I returned to my old self, a workaholic with no interest in socializing. The office became both a refuge and a prison. The long hours were grueling, but staying home meant tormenting myself with thoughts of Olivia. I couldn't stop picturing her with Bruce, replaying every detail, wondering if she thought about me or if she was already in his arms again. To escape the mental spiral, I buried myself in work. My usual approach to challenges, prolonged, aggressive strategizing, felt unbearable when applied to our divorce. I couldn't stand the thought of dragging it out. Instead, I offered Olivia a large lump sum in exchange for a fast and painless separation. I made it clear, if she didn't agree, the deal would be off the table. A part of me wanted her to fight back, to beg for another chance, to prove that our marriage mattered to her. I wanted her to show me that she cared about more than just the money, but she didn't. Her objections were weak, her arguments half-hearted. She accepted the offer with little resistance, and just like that, our marriage unraveled. 60 days later, it was over. A couple of months later, just as I'd expected, Bruce started falling behind on his loan payments. He received warnings in a formal letter from Bernie, clearly outlining that we would begin seizing assets if the matter wasn't resolved. Bruce bombarded us with phone calls and emails, pleading for more time, spinning excuses, and making empty promises. I instructed Bernie to hold firm. There would be no leniency. As soon as the law allowed, we would repossess everything we could. The night before the scheduled asset seizure, Bruce begged me for a face-to-face meeting. I agreed, sensing his desperation. He was running out of options and looking for anyone, especially Olivia, to bail him out. I relished the thought of seeing him squirm. We met in my office after hours. The building was nearly deserted, with only my assistant Sherry staying late, ready to handle paperwork if needed. When Bruce arrived, he was visibly nervous, his handshake clammy and his movements hesitant as he entered my office. Behind him, to my surprise, was Olivia. She lingered in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. My breath caught for a moment when I saw her. She was dressed to eliminate, wearing an outfit I used to love, her makeup flawless, and that familiar, fiery smile playing on her lips. There was no doubt in my mind that she was here to play her role, trying to manipulate me with whatever emotional hold she thought she still had. For a fleeting second, I felt an overwhelming urge to rush to her, to hold her, kiss her, but I crushed the thought. I forced my face into a cold mask, muttered a curt greeting, and kept my distance. Truthfully, I hadn't anticipated her being part of this meeting. I had meticulously planned how it would go, envisioning every move, but her presence was a wild card. For a moment, I considered sending her out, but then I decided she might inadvertently make the encounter more satisfying. Bruce started with his usual charm, plastering on a wide grin and diving into small talk. Mike, I just want to fix this. I respect you so much, and I hate how things have turned out. I want to make it right. I couldn't believe he actually thought we could bury the hatchet and return to some semblance of friendship. I stared at Bruce, my expression icy, and cut him off mid-sentence. Bruce, spare me the performance, I said coldly. Your apology means absolutely nothing to me. He recoiled as though I'd slapped him, his strained smile crumbling. After a tense pause, he nodded, his shoulders slumping. All right, Mike, he said quietly, his voice subdued. Let's get straight to business. Bruce looked at me expectantly, waiting for some signal to proceed. I gave him a curt gesture to continue. He licked his lips nervously, ran a shaky hand through his hair, and launched into his pitch. He assured me he fully intended to repay the loan but needed more time. Shifting the blame onto Bernie, he claimed the man was being inflexible. Bruce pressed me to give him another chance, arguing that his business was on the verge of recovery. He even insisted I'd come out ahead financially if I let him delay his payments. Leaning back in my chair, I studied him. His forehead glistened with sweat, his hands trembled, and his smile was fragile, stretched thin over his growing desperation. After a moment of silence, I spoke, my tone calm but razor-sharp. Bruce, if you weren't a lying, scheming opportunist, maybe I'd consider giving you a break. His face drained of color. He leaned forward, stammering a protest, but I raised a hand to silence him. Let's not pretend, Bruce, I said, cutting him off. It's hard to trust a man who didn't think twice about sleeping with his brother-in-law's wife. And now you have the audacity to ask me for financial help? That's laughable. Bruce shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Olivia, clearly uneasy, broke in with a shaky voice. Mike, you can't hold this against him. I turned on her, my glare sharp enough to make her flinch. Olivia, why are you even here? She hesitated. I thought I could talk to you. Maybe remind you of what we had. I still care about you, Mike. I laughed bitterly. What we had? Olivia, all your presence does is remind me of how Bruce figuratively screwed me over by literally screwing you. If you're here to help him, sit down, stay quiet, and stop making this worse. Her lips quivered as tears welled in her eyes, but she said nothing. She sat back, her silence filled with tension. I turned my attention back to Bruce. Here's the deal. You will repay every cent on time, according to the agreed-upon schedule. If you don't, I'll start liquidating your assets to recover the debt. Bruce shook his head vehemently. Mike, you can't do this. You can't take my business away. I can, and I will, I replied coolly. If you don't want that to happen, find the money. Borrow it, sell something. I don't care how you do it. But the banks won't lend me anything, and my family doesn't have that kind of cash, he whined. I stared at him. Don't give me that. I know your family has money. They don't, Bruce insisted. If they could help, they would. I smirked and gestured toward Olivia. What about her? Did you ask her for money? Bruce's head whipped toward Olivia, his face full of surprise. Olivia? Do you have money? Her expression turned pale. She fidgeted, clearly caught off guard. Well, yes, I do, but I need it for myself. I laughed again, my tone dripping with mockery. That's rich, Liv. You had no problem convincing me to give Bruce a chance when you thought it was a good investment. So why not now? Don't you believe in him anymore? Or are you finally seeing what I've known all along? I gave Olivia a sly, knowing grin. Her lips tightened as she swallowed hard, glancing uneasily between Bruce and me. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her back and said, with a trace of defiance in her voice, I'll cover the shortfall for now. Bruce's expression lit up with relief, and he shot her a grateful smile. Olivia smiled back, but it was weak, her disappointment etched in every line of her face. Together, they left my office. Bruce walking with a renewed sense of confidence, Olivia looking as though she'd just made a deal with the devil. As I held the door open, I offered one final instruction. Remember, Bruce, I said coldly, I don't care how you do it, just get me my money. You'll get your money, he snapped, bitterness creeping into his tone. Olivia's worried glance didn't escape me. Over the next few months, I buried myself in work, efficient and detached with everyone I interacted with. Social events were out of the question. Every effort I made to distract myself from Olivia's betrayal seemed futile. Reminders of her were everywhere, from her favorite songs on the radio to the monthly checks Bruce sent in, sitting like small trophies of misery on my desk. The checks brought a bitter sort of satisfaction. Each one felt like I was squeezing Bruce and Olivia dry, forcing them to feel some of the pain they'd caused me. But my satisfaction soured when I received an unexpected call from Mindy. To my surprise, Bruce and Olivia had confessed to her, or at least a sanitized version of the truth. Mindy admitted she had suspected something for a while. What horrified me most was her admission that she had made peace with their relationship. She even hinted at some informal arrangement, allowing Bruce and Olivia to continue seeing each other. Mindy tried, half-jokingly, to persuade me to reconcile with Olivia. My responses grew harsher with every email and call, until our second conversation ended with Mindy in tears. I never heard from her again, but her tolerance left me stewing. Any hope that Bruce and Olivia were paying an emotional price for their betrayal was gone. I feared that eventually Bruce's business would recover, he'd pay off the debt, and they'd walk away with financial security, leaving me to seem like the bitter fool who couldn't adapt to modern love. I didn't need to worry. 9 months after my confrontation with Bruce and Olivia, their furniture store burned to the ground in a spectacular 2-alarm fire that made the evening news. The blaze threatened nearby buildings, drawing a swarm of fire trucks and reporters. Bernie called me as soon as he saw the footage, livid over the potential financial loss. I told you this would blow up in our faces, Bernie fumed. Calm down, I reassured him. If Bruce defaults, I'll personally buy the loan. That property's value is in the land, not the ashes. That seemed to ease Bernie's frustration, though his doubts lingered. The fire raised immediate suspicions, and investigators soon determined it was arson. When accelerants were detected, the insurance company promptly refused to pay out. Without the store's income, Bruce defaulted on the loan, and I acquired both the charred remains of the property and the 35 acres of duck hunting land. The investigation dragged on for months. Detectives pieced together a compelling circumstantial case. The store had been hemorrhaging money, Olivia had been funneling increasing amounts of her own cash to keep it afloat, and Bruce had failed to secure loans or sell the business, even at a steep discount. They theorized the couple had hired someone to start the fire. Their evidence included search terms about arson found on Olivia's computer, phone records connecting her to 2 men with arson convictions, and a $15,000 cash withdrawal from her account just days before the blaze. Though strong, the case lacked direct proof. No one could place Bruce or Olivia near the scene on the night of the fire, and investigators couldn't tie them directly to any materials used to start it. Their defense attorney, no doubt funded by Olivia's dwindling resources, fought back fiercely. Negotiations began, likely starting with severe charges like first-degree arson, but eventually landing at a plea for fourth-degree arson. On the first day of trial, I was waiting in the courthouse lobby, flipping through a newspaper and absently tapping my foot, when a court official announced the case had been settled. The trial was canceled. As I packed up to leave, Bruce and Olivia entered the building, flanked by officers and their attorney. Reporters swarmed them, thrusting microphones into their faces. Both refused to comment, leaving their lawyer to field questions. Bruce quickly disappeared with Mindy and the officers, but Olivia lingered. To my surprise, she turned and approached me directly, her expression sharp and unapologetic. "Well, Mike," she began, her tone clipped, "is this what you wanted? Did you finally get your justice? Do you feel better now that I'm being punished for my sins?" I chuckled bitterly. "Justice? Hardly. What I wanted was a faithful wife and a happy marriage, things I'd never get from you. Absent that, all I want is my money," she snorted. "Your money? Well, you're not getting any of it now, are you?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, I've already gotten some of it back, and now I own the store." She laughed derisively. "What are you going to do with that? Has it even stopped smoldering yet?" "You'd be amazed," I replied, my voice calm. "A smart businessman can do wonders with prime real estate, even when it starts out smoking." Olivia's nostrils flared, her expression hardening. She drew in a deep breath, held it for a moment, then spoke again, this time with a smirk. "And now you're all alone, married to your job with no one by your side and perfectly miserable. Don't bother denying it. I know you, Mike. I know how much you hate meeting new people." I met her gaze evenly. "I'm working on it, Liv. I loved you, but you're not the only woman on this planet." She gave a confident smile. "No, not the only one. But I doubt you'll find, what's the phrase you corporate types love, an equivalent replacement. Like it or not, you'll miss me." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a whisper. "Maybe I'll feel a little lonely, sure, but you won't, will you? You'll have plenty of company, sharing a cozy space with women who have all the time in the world to appreciate your abundant love. I'm sure it'll be quite the experience for you, and for them." My words landed harder than I expected. Olivia flinched, her composure shattering. Her face twisted in contempt, her eyes blazing with fury. She drew in a sharp breath, her chest rising as she let loose in an enraged scream. "You sanctimonious, self-absorbed, emotionally crippled fool!" she shouted as the officer stepped in to escort her away. "You'll be just as miserable as I am. Alone, forever married to your pathetic hollow career." I stood still, watching her rage, feeling an odd mix of regret and detachment. There was no love left in her eyes, only hatred. For a brief moment, a wave of melancholy swept over me, but I pushed it aside, forcing a thin smile. "So much for keeping things dignified," I muttered, half to myself. Olivia wasn't finished. Her tirade continued, her voice echoing down the hallway. "It won't take long before I get out of this mess and move on with my life. And you'll still be alone, wishing you had me back. Years from now, when you're married to some boring, bland secretary, you'll regret everything." The courtroom door closed behind her, cutting off her voice mid-sentence. I turned and walked away, my steps echoing in the quiet hallway. My schedule was clear, no more meetings, no distractions. Feeling an oppressive sense of loneliness creeping in, I decided to visit the burned-out remains of Bruce's furniture store. The air was cold and biting as I stepped onto the lot, the wind tugging at my jacket and stinging my face. The wreckage was a chaotic mess of ash and debris, the scars of the fire stark against the dull November sky. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the ruins, wondering what to do with them. Should I cut my losses and sell the property? It would be the logical choice, safe, familiar, the kind of decision I'd always relied on. But another thought tugged at the back of my mind. I could rebuild, maybe even turn it into a new furniture store, standing as a symbol of recovery and success. I imagined the possibilities. Bold advertising campaigns, flashy billboards, even a grand opening with TV coverage. Hell, I could name the place Olivia's just for the irony, plastering it with clearance sales and blowout deals. The longer I stood there, the more I realized that my decision about this site was bigger than just a business choice. It was about my life. Olivia had been right about one thing. My instinct had always been to retreat, to avoid risks and challenges, to bury myself in work and keep people at a distance. Before her, I was on a slow march toward a lonely but stable existence. Now, surrounded by the wreckage of Bruce's failure, I felt like I was staring at my own crossroads. I could continue playing it safe, avoiding pain and disappointment. Or I could take a risk, rebuild something new, not just for this property, but for myself. As I turned to leave, planning to put the decision off for another day, a sudden break in the clouds sent rays of sunlight spilling onto the lot. The light illuminated a graffiti-covered wall across the street, where bold white letters scrawled in uneven strokes demanded attention. Take action. Normally I'd dismiss something like this as a coincidence or meaningless vandalism, but standing there in the cold, those words felt like they were meant for me. A challenge, a directive. I pulled out my phone and dialed my office. Sherry picked up almost immediately. "Hey Sherry," I said, my voice steady. "Do you remember the architecture firm that designed that new shopping center with the glass and fountains? The one everyone's been talking about?" Yeah, I think it's called Hammerstone," Sherry replied. I could hear the sound of her typing as she double-checked. "Yep, Hammerstone Architects. They're based here in Chicago." "Good. Set up a meeting with them as soon as you can," I instructed. Sherry hesitated. "Are we building something, boss?" I glanced around the lot again, imagining a sleek modern store rising from the ashes. Confidence surged through me as I answered. "Yes, Sherry, I think we are." Her tone shifted, tinged with a mix of surprise and excitement. "All right, anything else?" I paused for a moment, my gaze drifting back to the graffiti across the street. The word action stared back at me, bold and undeniable. "Yes, actually," I added. "Do you still have the contact info for that rep from the jeans company? Brenda White, I think?" Sherry sounded incredulous. "The tall blonde? Yeah, I remember her. Do you want me to connect you now?" "No, I'll call her myself," I said, smiling faintly. "Thanks, Sherry. Thanks."